In this video, I want to show you 3 ways to take the ribber needles back out of work. The first is to use the in-out cam, and actually you're likely to use this method the least often. You would untwist the cam and start to move it forward, but then you have to kind of crank a couple of times to kind of push. You see I'm kind of pushing those needles out with the cam for a couple of needles, and then push the next one in. And then you can see the needles will start to bypass the cam. And they'll go around the circle still, but they won't knit. To reverse the process, you simply do the same. You go back. You kind of wiggle them along until you can get the cam all the way to the back, and then tighten it in again. So the second is to park the needles, and you would do this when you're going to knit toes and heels. Let's say, for example, you started with a cuff down sock and you've knit ribbing all the way down the sock, and now you're ready for the heel. Because the ribber does not go back and forth, you're going to want to take the ribber out of work, but you might want to park the needles, at least the ones on the front half of the foot, so that when you're finished with the heel, you can pick up and resume the ribbing again. So let's say I want to park all the needles after the main mark. I would simply pull the ribber needles down and out of the way and lift up the cylinder needles. And you do that all the way around. And you have to kind of hold them just right at this area so that they don't go back under the tappet plate. As you begin turning around the cylinder, this is my first parked needle, and you just want to watch right here too to make sure that it doesn't get caught trying to go back under that tappet plate. And you can just hold with your thumb down on the outside of the cylinder to bypass that area if you need. And you can continue all the way around like that until you're ready to take the ribber off. So normally you would park half the needles, and then you would transfer the stitches in the other half, the part that's going to go on the bottom of the foot. You would transfer those ribber needles back to your cylinder needles so they could be back put into work with regular knitting, no longer the ribbing. If possible, it is ideal to park your ribber needles by actually tucking them into the cylinder band. And they kind of just rest underneath there. So here I am taking out half my cylinder needles so that I can get ready to knit the heel of a sock. And so you see I'm just tucking them in. It depends on the tension of my yarn and the exact cylinder, and whether I've got every 4th needle on rib or every other needle on rib, whether I can really get them to go in and stay in the band. But if you are able to get them to stay, that is really the most ideal method for parking the needles. Once all of your ribber needles are parked and your cylinder needles are lifted, then you can go ahead and remove the ribber frame and just carefully lift it out of place so you don't dislodge any of those needles. And then they can simply rest on this side of the cylinder while you're able to continue working on this half of the cylinder. These would be back in work, and so you could be working on you're turning your heel, for example, on this side, and this side would freely spin back and forth with nothing in your way, so you can continue to knit until it's time to put them back in work after you finish the heel. When you're ready to put the ribber back into work, if possible, to the extent possible, I tip the ribber needles out and make sure that the ribber needles are going in between the proper cylinder needles. And I just kind of use my hand to hold them. If I'm only doing half the cylinder, I can usually get most of them in my hand. You might want to momentarily put down the needles on the other side. I usually lift them up and out of work so that I can make sure that I can freely spin the cylinder any way I need. Okay, and you're going to try to tuck the ribber dial so as many of those ribber needles as possible fall on the outside. Okay. Looks like I caught all of them except for just this one. So then I make sure they're all out before I put the frame on. And again, if you needed to spin back and forth, you could do that. And then before I forget, I lift all the rest of my needles up and out of work. Because again, I just want to make sure everything is positioned exactly like I want before I start knitting again. And I didn't want to accidentally drop a stitch in the meantime. Okay. So now all of my parked needles are on the outside of my cylinder. They're appropriately on the correct side of my cylinder needles. So I'm ready to reattach my ribber frame. Before you start placing any of your ribber needles back in the dial, make sure your dial, you kind of turn it backwards a little bit to make sure that the ribber stop is well seated against the ribber fin. Otherwise, you'll end up with ribber needles in the wrong slots. The next thing to watch is it's important to notice where your working yarn stopped. Here is my working yarn right here at the main mark, and I'm going to make sure that it's coming off the right side of that needle. And I'm not going to thread my yarn yet because I really want to wait until the main mark is right at the center of the yarn feeder, but I am going to start putting the ribber needles back into work. And again, if you need to move things back a little bit, that's why we have everything lifted and out of work, so you have the freedom to do that. This is a really important step, is that you will have to use your pick tool to lift up the stitch. Oops. And then place your ribber needle, and then make sure that your ribber latch is open so that it can slide underneath, underneath your open stitch, and then drop it back down. Okay. Turn, you can do the next one. I'll show you one more. So you make sure the latch is open, and then lift with your pick tool. Replace the ribber needle, and then you can lay the stitch on the front of the open needle. You can also push down now your cylinder needles that you're ready to put back in work, all of them that are on the right side of your working yarn. So remember not to push too far. Those will start to come into work as well. So I'm going to continue around until my working yarn is right at the break in the yarn feeder. So here I am. This is my first. This is the last needle that has the working yarn attached to it. You can see it's positioned right at the center of the yarn feeder. So I'm going to go ahead and rethread my yarn at this point. And then I will just watch and make sure that the stitches are knitting. Yep, I can see they're catching. And then I continue just one by one, putting the rest of my needles back into work. So now let's say I want to take these needles out of work. I'm at the end of my sock, I'm at the toe, and I'm going to knit one final knit row. So this is my needle. I'm just going to put my regular cylinder needle back in, and then lift out my ribber needle and just place the stitch right over the cylinder needle. That was it. It's very easy. So again, we'll do another one. Pull the needle forward, the neighbor, in order to be able to get the cylinder needle in place. Make sure the latch is open, and then lift out the ribber needle and simply use that needle to place the stitch transfer it from the rubber needle onto the cylinder needle. That's it. Of course, the final way to remove the rubber needles is to simply take the project off the machine. So just like you normally would, you would remove the yarn from the yarn feeder so it's in the center, pull down hard from the bottom, and just start cranking around. You'll see that it will pull the whole project off. You want to make sure you have a little bit of slack. It'll pull the whole project off for you, and then you can lift, undo your rubber, and lift it up and out of work. I hope that helps. Happy cranking. Visit us at deanandbean.com and please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.